Hello viewers, today we are going to analyze a classic story written by U.R. Anantha titled Samskara. The story has a backdrop of a street in a small village called Durvasapura, which is in the western Ghats of Karnataka. A majority of the people who live in the street belong to the community of Madhvas, which is a Brahmin community. The people who stay here have a traditional mindset and strictly follow the rules defined by their religion. Praneshacharya and Narnappa are the two main characters who dominate the story. Praneshacharya is an orthodox Brahmin and he has completed his Vedic education at Varanasi and has returned to Durvasapura and is considered as most learned man of the Brahmin community of his village and the neighboring ones. His main aim of life is to attain liberation or moksha and has a strong will to attain it. To remain steadfast on his goal and as an act of self-sacrifice, he marries an invalid woman and hence remains celibate. The second important character, Narnappa, is a Brahmin by birth, but one who has violated the set rules of Brahminism by eating non-vegetarian food and by keeping the company of a whore called Chandri. Once, Narnappa and his friends do the unimaginable. They catch the sacred fish in the temple tank, cook and eat them. This causes the Brahmins in the village to revolt against them and the whole gang. The villagers approach Praneshacharya and compel him to expel him out of the village. Praneshacharya decides to be little humane and takes extreme step to support him as he believes that Narnappa can be convinced to get rid of his immoral acts. Once, Narnappa visits Shimoga and he returns to Durvasapura with high fever and unfortunately he dies. The Brahmins are left in a perplexed situation because according to a Brahmin ideology, a person who dies should be cremated as early as possible. None of the Brahmins wants to take the initiative and cremate the body. They feel that by cremating Narnappa's body, they will become polluted as he had violated the Brahmin principles during his life. However, the Brahmin principles also specify that a non-Brahmin cannot cremate the body of a Brahmin. Praneshacharya, being the leader, is responsible for the right and to provide quick solution to this complex problem. He tries to find the answer in holy books, but they do not provide any solution. He then goes to a temple to pray God and spends a whole day there. Saddened at not being able to solve the problem, he trudges back home. On his way, he meets the village prostitute Chandri. He is awestruck by her beauty and when he wakes up in the middle of the night, he finds himself lying on Chandri's lap. Chandri rushes home, finds that Narnappa's body has started to decay. She cremated or she gets it cremated in secrecy and leaves Durvasapura. Praneshacharya is left in a piquant situation on whether he has to reveal his immoral act to the people of the village or keep quiet about it. Feeling guilty, he leaves the village, but the guilt never leaves him. Finally, deciding to own up his act, he returns to the village and the story ends there. It is left to the imagination of the viewer on whether Praneshacharya owns up his guilt or not. That is the quick or the snapshot of the whole novel. It can be considered that all who participate in the caste system are literally refining themselves and others by perfecting their respective roles. As the individual refines himself or herself, society is also in the process made perfect and a samskara is formed. An unswerving example of samskara in action comes briefly from summarizing the main events of the book. Narnappa, one of the two main characters of the novel, is dead, and as a Brahmin, another Brahmin is required to perform the funeral obsequies. Narnappa's past actions compel others to question his purity and refinement, and in the process they expose their own. As the Brahmins discuss the preparations for the funeral rites, Praneshacharya is propelled into his own rite of passage. Praneshacharya, the protagonist of the novel, is the most distinguished Brahmin of the Agrahara and is forced to provide answers concerning how unorthodox Narnappa's funeral rites should be performed. This leads Praneshacharya through an internal samskara. He has to purify himself. He has to refine himself to come out with a right answer and face the villagers. He had a negative impression of his adversary, that is Narnappa, as the extreme opposite of himself. Narnappa ignored all of the fixed notions of what a Brahmin should be in many ways, but mostly by distancing himself from his Brahmin wife and courting Chandri, a whore. Praneshacharya begins his journey as a perfected idea of a preconceived notion, only to be transformed and return from his own purificatory sacrament as a new man. Praneshacharya meditates in a temple devoted to Lord Hanuman or Maruti, awaiting for his answers to the other Brahmins' questions. As an internal event, meaningfully coincides with an external event. Chandri seduces Praneshacharya. Despite his preparations, Praneshacharya lies with Chandri, thus transcending or regressing as he fears his conceptions, ideas and notions of what he should be. The union of opposites occurs as Praneshacharya becomes identical to Narnappa in his actions. He has a realization of past perceptions and the beginning of a release from them, and leads him to explore the city and its activities that are foreign to him. In this way, he continues his samskara, of which we do not see a resolution. Interestingly, the novel does not provide an answer throughout. It is left to the imagination of the readers. Strangely, the book itself seems to be a samskara. By archetypally providing binary opposites and having them unite by embracing the non-traditional side of the separation, samskara seems to promote a new paradigm. It shows the social coercion of the caste system and the cognitive dissonance created in the minds of its followers, particularly the Brahmins, while displaying Narnappa and Putta as unattached and free-spirited. It seems that there may be a suggestion that they perhaps are the most refined by being less encapsulated by their ideas and conceptions formed in the mind. The overall theme is stated aptly in the title. Samskara is Praneshacharya's journey, and it seems like one of the seeker who goes to the mountain but returns to the city as a better and evolved human being, more equipped to handle his life but reversed. Praneshacharya leaves the mountain and enters the city, and in the process is freed from many samskaras that may deserve funeral obsequies. There seemed to be a notion, unreservedly incidental, that there is a difference between Narnappa's free spirituality and Praneshacharya's confining religion. The novel Samskara by U.R. Anantha translated by A.K. Ramanujan in English, is a novel about the people in a Brahmin agrahara trying to decide on who should perform the death rites of a dead Brahmin's body who was considered to be a person full of vices. When we commit sin, we don't realize, but then people definitely remember when we die. And that is what has happened in Narnappa's case. While projecting this, the roles of women are brought up very interestingly. Chandri, a low caste woman and a whore who seduced Narnappa, is an example of all women of such a caste. Putta's wife, only briefly mentioned, represents women who are between the caste, from mixed caste marriages, or in them themselves. Lakshmi Devamma, the child widow, is the old lonely woman who is on the outskirts of her village. Bhagirathi, the Acharya's wife. Finally, there are Brahmin wives such as Anasuya and Sita Devi who stand for all Brahmin women and women in general. All the women in Samskara represent any other women like them in their choices, actions and the ways they are described. Lakshmi Devamma was a child widow. The passage describing her ill fate. Look at the sentences. Married at 8, widowed at 10. Her mother-in-law and father-in-law had died when she was 15. The agrahara had sneered at her. Seems to imply that the people of agrahara believe that she was responsible for the deaths around her, that she had done something wrong, or what she was, or in other words, she was called a cursed woman. Bhagirathi is Praneshacharya's wife. Praneshacharya deliberately marries her so that he can remain celibate throughout his life away from other female charms. His only objective is to attain moksha or liberation. With this goal, he serves her and nurtures her and takes care of her. He does not simply want to take care of her, but he also wants to use his caring for her as a way to practice his penance or tapas. Acharya is filled with pleasure and a sense of worth as sweet as fivefold nectar of holy days. He is filled with compassion for his ailing wife. He proudly swells a little at his lot, thinking that by marrying an invalid, I get ripe and ready. Look at the kind of path Acharya has chosen to liberate himself from this earthly life. The Brahmins are in the highest caste, but they are still not equal to the men. When Chandri informs the Brahmin of Narnappa's death, she was expected to wait for them to take a right decision and not interrupt them during their discussions. Like Chandri, even Brahmin wives watch and wait, unable to participate. Now look at this sentence. It's a line from the novel. They came in through the back door, into the middle hall, unable to contain their curiosity, afraid that their husbands might do something rash. But they could not advise their husbands or say what they thought should be done. In this way, even the high caste women are pitched at the same level as Chandri. The women of Samskara are symbols for women of the rest of their caste, and the attitude that the novel takes towards them reflects how women of their own caste ought to be treated. And women are ill-treated by their husbands. And this is not very special to Putta's wife or Ansuya's daughter Leelavati. And even is not limited to husbands, but an even unrelated man, unfortunately, can take advantage of a widowed woman, such as happens with Lakshmi Devamma. The novel opens paradoxically enough, committed to a complete denial of life through renunciation. He is awkwardly perched on the high pedestal on which his own learning and the esteem of his fellow Brahmins have positioned him. He is a profound scholar from Kashi and is well versed in the scriptures. He has earned the title crest jewel of Vedic learning. Pranishacharya's personal conduct is also loftily impractical, not at all pragmatic. He has based his life on extreme austerity and sacrifice, abstaining from vital human experience. He has married a sick and a disabled woman intentionally, and for 20 years he has served her loyally and well, nursing her as one would tend a child, without stain of dissatisfaction. He adhered to a routine which is as ascetic and monotonous. There are some interesting aspects which make his character worth studying and analyzing. The writer has led the reader towards a subsequent fall and made it psychologically conceivable by subtly indicating at some admixture of earthly qualities or components in his composition. Immensely superior as he is as to other Brahmins, Pranishacharya is not altogether free from human weakness. He is also an ordinary mortal. Since Pranishacharya is trying to live up to an impractical ideal, it does not surprise the readers that he succumbs to Chandri's lusty invitation in the forest. When he wakes up, he is full of guilt and feels that he has lost the worth and merit he had accrued. He asks Chandri to perform the funeral rites himself and is willing to perform the funeral rites himself. There is, however, another aspect of Pranishacharya's response which is equally important. On waking up, he feels as though he had turned over and fallen into his childhood, lying in his mother's lap and finding rest there after great fatigue. He who had distanced from his fellow Brahmins now feels that he has come down to their level or stooped down to their level. His coldness gradually withers away and he begins to respond tenderly to human affection. Annoyed with Putta at first, he slowly warms to him and even begins to feel lonely without him. So his union with Chandri, the whore of the village, has brought the required change in his personality. Pranishacharya has calmed down. He has become normal. Unfathomable depths of feeling and experience assault him on all sides, enriching him with new perspectives and level of awareness he would not have been capable of in his original unfallen state. That is, unfallen state here can be defined as his life before meeting Chandri. His mind now begins to brood over insightful questions of human freedom and responsibility. He recognizes his present ambiguity or Trishanku state. He knows that he will be free from it only through a free, deliberate, wide awake, fully willed act. The novel ends inconclusively without giving any right solution to the readers, with Pranishacharya waiting anxious expectant while being driven back to Durvasapura, unable to free himself completely and to become committed firmly to a demonic world. Now let's analyze another interesting character, Naranappa. Naranappa, also a Brahmin like Pranishacharya, affects change, embraces modernism, denies Brahminhood and brings home Chandri, a whore from Kundapura, a nearby hamlet. He indulges in all worldly pleasures like drinking alcohol and consuming meat. He throws Saligrama, the holy stone which is believed to represent God Vishnu, into the river and spits after it. The Brahmin wives used withered flowers from the altar to decorate their hair, and they hung at their back like a rat's tail. Whereas Narnappa grows the night queen in his backyard, quite contrary to the other Brahmins living in the neighborhood, and the flowers are meant solely to adorn Chandri's hair and not to offer to God, which lies like a coiled serpent on her back. Narnappa, with his friends, catches sacred fish from the temple tank, cooks and eats them. Other Brahmins are horrified at this impious act. They have believed till then that these fish should not even be touched, that whosoever touches them will vomit blood and will die. Narnappa has even influenced the youth of the Agrahara in a negative way. Because of him, one young man left Durvasapura and joined the army, where he is forced to eat beef. Another young man left his wife and home and joined a travelling group of singers and actors. Narnappa's only ambition in life seems to do everything that destroys the Brahminhood of Agrahara. The Brahmanism of Praneshacharya was the only thing that he failed to pollute. Orthodox society tries hard to suppress the rebel Narnappa and also to expel him from the village to get rid of him and his misdeeds. In Hinduism, an individual has multiple options to choose paths towards salvation depending on one's own caste. The only demand that one has to meet on this path is that of dharma or the right conduct. If one is capable of fulfilling one's dharma, then one comes closer to liberation, that is moksha. For a woman, this means being loyal to her husband. For a Brahmin, this means living his life according to the 4 life stages or ashramas and practicing Vedic rituals. In the novel Samskara by U.R. Anantha, it contrasts many possible paths to salvation, including that of Narnappa and that of Praneshacharya. At first glance, a sinner and a saint. However, the novel does not provide any solace to the reader on the clarity of the concept of dharma. The reader can easily jump to the conclusion that neither Narnappa nor Praneshacharya is successful at performing the dharma of a Brahmin because neither of them fulfilled the life stages and the performance of the rituals. Now let us look at another interesting theme of this novel, that is cultural crisis. The novel aids the reader to analyze the cultural crisis, set goals with right approach to evolve positively in socially cordial atmosphere. So the question is, are the Brahmins of the Agrahara are truly pious and refined? Have they been cleansed to understand the nature of a true Brahmin? The main protagonist, Praneshacharya, experiences the process of purification. His shift from hardcore ritualism to realism is thought-provoking. The author's perspective of unorthodoxy flows undercurrent. The problem of the funeral rites of Narnappa is looming large on Brahmin community of Durvasapura. Anantha asks the readers for the solutions for all the problems originating from casteism, untouchability, conflicting thoughts and actions in ritualistic life. Another theme, it talks about the lofty theme, that is Indian value system. This great country has a value system that governs its intellect and sensibility. The writer depicts a socio-religious change in the novel. We can set examples of the enlightened great men of all times who had command over their senses and mind and worked for social, national and human causes and sacrificed all the pleasures of life within their approach. But Praneshacharya is a victim of vagaries of his own mind. As a normal human being wants, he also wants to enjoy all the material pleasures centered to women and children. But he cannot do this because his wife is a sickly woman. He nurses following the law of Nishkama Karma. The lack of sensual pleasure is creating psychological lacuna in him. Another theme which catches the attention of the readers is socio-religious and socio-psychological reality. The humble yet small society of Agrahara reflects the dynamic socio-religious and socio-psychological reality. Samskara depicts disintegration of values, and the writer seems a mere presentation of mundane reality, rather holding the mirror to move the mass in the right direction. Anantha Murthy's most potent character, Praneshacharya, is the most fickle one, a mere bookworm, and the least rational to turn his knowledge into action. Society expects a meaningful change, and the novel presents merely the change of ethics, but not the destination that change will lead to. Anantha Murthy portrays the selfish and narrow attitude of corrupt Brahmin community. Their lives are full of immoral actions as they do not meet the standards of the morality. Conduct is imperfect unless it proceeds from a spiritual vision of all being as one. All good spontaneously follows from spiritual realization. So directly or indirectly, in time and again, the writer has been hinting at spiritual realization or the significance of spiritual realization in the individual's life. When the novel ends, Praneshacharya is still in his luminal phase. With a perplexed mind, he returns to Durvasapura. It is clear that Praneshacharya was unable to fulfill his dharma as a Brahmin, and Naranappa also failed to adhere to the austere Vedic rituals. The writer is of the opinion that Brahmanism must be a fine blend of worldly and spiritual experiences as savoured by Praneshacharya and Naranappa. To lead a complete life, or as Praneshacharya or as Naranappa did, it is too easy and it will not lead to salvation. You do not get to see any efforts to attain salvation. There is no touch of spirituality. To be able to do both, to live part of your life as a householder, experiencing the worldly desires, and then to be able to shun those desires and live as a renouncer is the hardest thing of all, and perhaps the only way to fulfill the dharma of a Brahmin. Thus, the novel ends on a hopeful note that people may find some solution after reading this novel. That is the conclusion of this great novel titled Samskara. Now, let us look at the different parts of the story in the next program. Thank you.